you also prefer analog hardware like synthesizers and outboard to produce electronic music, then you will be familiar with this problem. Constant shortage of inputs and outputs. Hilfe! Hilfe! Hi folks! In this video I'll tell you how to set up a Presonus Studiolive Series 3 32-channel digital rack mixer as an audio interface to use specifically with Ableton Live on your Mac. But the principle should be the same with any other DAW and other Presonus rack mixers and consoles. Before I bought this beast, I had many questions regarding the use as an interface. The Presonus website and YouTube were not of a great help, as the main market for this kind of gear seems to be live musicians, especially for worship and church stuff in the US. Here in Europe, where the earth is still round, churches are more kind of museums where they play Bach on their pipe organs. So, no need for digital mixers. Hallelujah! Also, Presonus does not seem to have any kind of pre-customer support. It's literally impossible to contact them via email. Of course, I also never received an answer to my inquiry for a test unit. I hope that the customer support for registered users is more responsive. So I decided to order one at Thomann. There you can return it for 30 days if it doesn't work out for you or if you simply don't like it. But please, take care of the gear anyway. And they have excellent fast delivery and customer service. This is why we feature affiliate links to Thomann in the description. It's also a nice way to support us if you decide to buy something we present here. Thanks for that. So why a digital mixer? What are the benefits of a digital rack mixer like this compared to a conventional audio interface? When I started to make music again, I bought a MacBook, installed Ableton Live and connected a simple audio interface that I had lying around. If you are just using plugins and satisfied with the results, just stop here and be happy with your small interface. I tell you. But then I bought a drum machine and a synth. And those new analog clones are especially appealing to me because of their single outs. So I decided to buy a bigger interface and did not see any need for a mixer at all. It seemed so 90s to me and I did not want to sacrifice too much space in my living room. By the time the Arturia AudioFuse Studio just came out and I decided to give it a go. I added a Behringer ADA 8200 to benefit of the ADAT channels. So I had 18 ins and 20 outs, which was plenty enough for almost 2 years while I was trying out gear and optimizing my workflow, which led to this channel. As you can see in my recent studio tour video, my setup now reached a critical mass, where the inputs were simply not sufficient anymore. My first idea was to aggregate a cheap interface like the Behringer UMC 1820 plus another ADA, which is quite a great entry-level interface. My acid mate Stefan uses one for recording. And on the Mac you can aggregate as much interfaces as you like, which as a former PC user still fascinates me very much. But to be honest, I'm not 100% satisfied with the Midas preamps of the Behringer compared to the ones of the Arturia, which are definitely of a higher grade. Also, the AKM converters on the interface definitely have a better resolution and headroom than the ones on the Behringer. And chaining gear might work fine for a while, but sooner or later the weakest link will break and cause trouble. And ADAT connections are something that I don't trust much. Also, I don't like patch bass. Nicht gut. To finding a solution. First, I checked out audio interfaces with more ins and outs. Preferably 64 from each to be safe for the next years. I stumbled around stuff like Dante and AVB, which I knew nothing about, and was truly horrified by the prices of corresponding RME and TLOP, UAD and other systems. Definitely not in my retirement budget. So my next idea was to use a mixer. My last own mixer was a Studiomaster 24824 inline split recording desk, which had a very rich sound and the kind of preamps that gave a wonderful overdrive. But it was big, heavy and had a power consumption like the rest of the studio altogether. So buying and using an old analog mixer was also no option for me. And I really never used a digital mixer in my life before. So I came across digital live consoles and realized that they also work as studio interfaces and have plenty of optional connectivity to offer. And they often also exist as compact rack mount versions. The three candidates I had on my radar were the Behringer/Midas X32 M32 family, NNTs with the SQ series, and of course the Presonus Studiolive family. 3. Why Presonus? Finally, I ended up with Presonus mainly for the following reasons. The most attractive and compact rack offer with 32 physical ins that is expandable to 64 ins and outs with stage boxes connected via AVB, which means audio-video bridging, which is a straightforward and easy to operate network standard to connect gear. Optionally, you can also connect any Studiolive console to Pilot and or use the 32R as a stage box or as a monitor mixer. And for now, the Rackmixer with its number of physical inputs and outputs is just exactly what I need. But Achtung! For your understanding, as a standalone digital mixer, the Studiolive 32R is internally limited to 40 channels with 22 internal mix buses. Additionally, connected ins and outs can be patched and routed internally for several purposes. But this is not our subject today. Another big plus for the Presonus is the fact that they have combo sockets for XLR and jacks. This might seem a banality, but consider this. If you basically want to connect synths and other line gear, recabling everything to XLR is as time-consuming as costly. The next reason is that it's easy to control via network with the laptop or tablet, which works totally fine, especially when you connect a Wi-Fi router to the mixer. A con that is often hard, especially when it comes to the comparison with high-end audio interfaces, is that Presonus mixers only operate at 48 kHz. But to be honest, if you are recording dance music or any other genre of loudness-inflated sound, this is more than totally sufficient. The day somebody asks me to record the Berliner Philharmoniker, I can still rent appropriate and decent equipment. And after my first mixes on the Studiolive, I have to say that it sounds absolutely great. The preamps are extremely clean and there is absolutely no noise, as long as you won't use old Roland choruses. And of course, this is a digital mixer that has insane built-in DSP power with over 280 processors. Later on, I will also show you how to use it when using the mixer as an interface in Ableton Live. 4. Connecting the Presonus to your computer is easy. To use it as an interface, simply connect it via the USB port. USB 2.0 is absolutely sufficient, so don't care to plug it into a hub. No drivers are needed and the mixer instantly appears in the Mac's audio MIDI setup. By the way, this is also the menu which serves to aggregate multiple interfaces in your Mac. Afterward, you'll have to install the universal control software to set up the mixer parameters. Also, firmware updates will be performed automatically via universal control. To make it short, UC, universal control, is your mixer's user interface. So, for your understanding, you don't need to run universal control from your audio host computer. You can also install it on a tablet or on a separate computer in order to have a dedicated control surface for the mixer. I prefer the wireless solution with my iPad. Therefore, just plug in a Wi-Fi router to the mixer. The mixer will now be part of the router's network and you can select it with the device of your choice. In universal control, you now have to make a simple setting and you are ready to go with your new audio interface. Click here and select Interface Mode. Done. So now you are ready to go with your new mixer interface. A detail that might be a problem for you is that specifically the Rackmixer only has one distinct stereo main output and only one headphone out. If you want to use different monitors and additional headphone amps, you will definitely miss something like a monitor control section. And here, your old audio interface or even a small additional line mixer could be of good use for you. This is why I kept my AudioFuse Studio in the system. So if I am using the mixer in standalone mode to work DAWless, the stereo out is simply routed to a stereo input of my interface. In Ableton, both the mixer and the interface are aggregated so that my main DAW output also still uses the interface. 5. Software and DAW. Contrary to the somehow restrained first contact attempts with Presonus via the internet, I have to say that once you have registered the Presonus, they have plenty of downloads and great tutorials on their user's website. After registration, you can download Presonus' own Fat Channel plugins, which are native versions of the built-in DSP channel processors of the mixer. It contains a nice selection of classic compressors and EQs. In the mixer, they sound absolutely great and cover all the important industry standard mixing tools. But I did not try the native versions in the DAW so far. In Ableton, I mostly rely on stock plugins and FabFilter. And I almost never buy plugins. But this is a subject I will cover in another video. And of course, as it is Presonus, it comes with a smaller version of Studio One and even Ableton Live Lite, among many other plugin freebies. But now to the most important part. How to set up your mixer with Ableton Live. Go to the settings in Ableton and select the mixer as your audio device. Do not be frightened, this looks worse than it is, because Ableton shows all internal channels of the mixer. And concerning the inputs, you are good to go. Channels 1 to 32 are corresponding to the physical inputs. To make it clearer, it's always a good idea to activate only the inputs and outputs that are physically in use. But then I had some trouble locating the outputs. And with 64 possibilities, you have a lot of options to try out. I found a hint somewhere in a Presonus support forum that the physical outputs are internally routed to the outputs 39 to 57. Maybe they could add this important detail to their documentation. Otherwise, the manual is very helpful and gives a lot of mixing suggestions and contains even a top secret recipe if you like cooking. Hey Presonus, contact me if you want to add a decent wine pairing. So, when you have located your inputs and outputs in the Ableton audio setup, I highly recommend naming them with the connected instruments. This makes input selection easier while recording. If you aggregate the mixer with other interfaces, it becomes even more confusing. But once you have done your setup and made a nice template, everything works like any other normal interface. And usually, if you don't forget to switch something on, you will not realize that you are working on different interfaces in parallel. The round-trip latency of my system on a Mac Mini M1 is around 8 milliseconds at 64 samples of buffer. Also, when several interfaces are linked, there is no difference. 6. some recording tips. The most difficult thing now is to connect all your gear to the audio of the mixer. And of course, not only outputs, but also inputs. But this is also the chance of your life to rework your cable management and to clean the studio. The whole cabling took me around 2 or 3 days until I had everything perfectly in place. The most time-consuming were 2 broken cables that were difficult to locate once everything was connected. So do yourself a favor and check every cable separately while connecting. A later search is extremely annoying. Also, Velcros and cable ties are of great help. One of the main reasons for me to have so many inputs is my passion for the use of single outputs of drum machines. And as I chose the Behringer RD9 as my main drums, I also wanted to get the best possible sound out of it. And if you ever used the 808, 909, 707 or one of these clones, you might have recognized that a processed sound from the single outs is a secret sauce to make fatter beats with these machines. Especially on the RD9 that only has a mono main out, it offers the possibility to pen the single sounds for a more dynamic mix. And here, having a good digital mixer comes in handy. Because even if you just use it in interface mode, you can access a lot of the mixer functions via universal control. With the input gain, also the weakest sound can be brought to optimum level with the so-called Xmax preamps. Here are also the controls for phantom power in case you want to use a condenser mic. Also a phase switch and a link function to create stereo channels. A high-pass filter is cool to filter everyday rumble noise like a good old Berliner Straßenbahn out of your mic signal. The other routing options can be widely ignored while being in the interface mode. If you now switch the channel from pre to post, the mixer allows you to use the channel strip of the mixer on the input before your signal enters your DAW. And this one contains all sorts of compressors and EQs inspired by the all-time classic tools from SSL, DBX, Baxendor, Neve, Pultec and etc. etc. They all sound quite nice and usable, and if you can't make a decent mix with those, go again. They also have very convincing and precise standard tools that I can absolutely recommend sound-wise. To be more consistent throughout the mix, I opted for the SSL G-Style compressor on the majority of my inputs. This one actually sounds quite authentic as far as the warm audio master bus compressor, which is an analog SSL compressor clone, is an acceptable benchmark for you. And if you didn't know, the glue compressor in Ableton is also an SSL G-Style clone. What I also like to do is to put a limiter on each input channel. So I am always sure to avoid clipping while recording in the DAW. As far as I understood, this is not really necessary as the AED stage of this mixer has an inbuilt limiter and processes the signal in 32-bit floating point internally. But anyway, I'm a bit conservative with gain staging and I like to keep the controls over my levels while recording. Another useful tool is a gate, which helps to eliminate noise floor, like a vintage Juno or JX chorus. This way, your sound comes in almost perfect whenever you hit the record button in Ableton. And the best part of it is that it's processed by the mixer's DSPs and not by the computer. So latency is not a thing. If you prefer to make your processing in Ableton or want to add some effects, consider using only stock plugins, because they also operate with zero additional latency. Sometimes this can be the first rescue for fuzzy timing in live, especially in conjunction with external instruments. So what else? I'm sure that I will discover many other useful things while getting more and more used to the mixer's internals with the universal control. For sure, I plan to make entire mixes on the Studiolive to see how it sounds in comparison to the usual Ableton in-the-box mixes we make. If you also use a Presonus mixer, I would also be glad to hear your tips in the comments. Conclusion. Until now, I'm totally satisfied by the easy handling as an interface and the transparent, clean and deep sound of the Studiolive Series 3 mixers. Especially drums and bass gain a pleasant amount of pressure and transient kick. This is why I can at least recommend the rack versions as a professional and cost-efficient alternative to dedicated top-of-the-notch audio interfaces. Nicht so einen Krach machen. Especially when you need unreasonable amounts of audio ins and outs like I do. And even if you never had the idea to buying a dedicated mixer for your studio in the first place, you will quickly see that a good mixer, no matter if analog or digital, is an essential tool to shape your sound, especially while recording. And since I use this one, which is also truly a pleasure to use with an iPad, I'm asking myself if the next step up for the studio could possibly be a matching hardware mixer console. What do you think? Leave a comment, and while you are at it, tickle the algorithm and give us a like. Thank you. For now, we have some tracks and mixes to produce for our label project Drehstrom. Check it out on Bandcamp. Well, I hope this video was useful for you, and I wish you a creative and inspiring time. Peace!